Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to discuss about Spring AOP, which means Aspect Oriented Programming. Okay. So here is the agenda. First, we'll discuss about the overview of AOP, why AOP, and the scenarios where we use AOP, and the core concept and the advice types are like here aspect, advice, join point, point cut, and other annotations like before, after, around, after returning, after throwing. At last, then we go hands on. Okay, let's start with. Most of the enterprise applications have some common cross-cutting concerns that are applicable to different types of objects and models. Some of the common cross-cuttings are like, if you see that logging, right, logging a framework, log framework means where you want to log the loggers at each class level, at the method level, how our functional flow is happening, which means that when you make a request, when a client send a request, it goes to some controller which handle the request in terms to go to the service layer, DAO layer, and so on, so on. And then we are adding the loggers at the entry point and exit point and between there. And also to handle exceptions and data validations and transaction management. All these are called cross-cutting concerns. In object-oriented programming, this modularity application is achieved by classes, but in aspect-oriented programming application, this modularity is achieved by aspects. Okay, what is this aspects? Okay, no worry, let me come to that point. And they are configured to cut these across different classes. This Spring AOP takes out the direction or takes out the direct dependency of cross-cutting tasks from classes that we cannot achieve through normal object-oriented programming model. Now let's take, for example, we can have a separate class for logging, but again, the functional classes will have to call these methods to achieve logging and to the entire applications, which means then for logging, right, you have to integrate the logging framework, and there is a separate class for logging to build this. And all our functional classes like service layer, DAO layer, helper, utility class, and so on, how to call all these methods to log that information to trace our program. That's why this AOP is a programming paradigm whose aim is to increase this modularity by allowing the separation of these cross-cutting concerns. Which means this AOP does this by adding additional behavior to the existing code. How that? Without modifying the code itself, which means it provides the functionality to add a new code and behavior separately. In this Spring framework, this one of the key component is aspect-oriented programming framework, which means this aspect-oriented programming entails break down our programming logic into distinct parts called as concerns. The functions that span multiple points of an application are called cross-cutting concerns. So you're clear with this? What is a cross-cutting concerns, right? These cross-cutting concerns are conceptually separate from the application business logic. Which means a cross-cutting concern is a concern that can affect the whole application and should be centralized in one common location in code as possible. Which means let's take only this logging framework as we discussed. Now we have a requirement, we have to add a logger to the entire applications, right? Whichever the classes, whether it is a controller, service layer, DAO layer, utility layer, helper class, whatever it may be. You have to write in this logger and each and every method, right, at starting, ending, in between also. So this AOP is the one which help us to do that in one location. It is a central location in one location in the code for this. How do this? That we will see that. First discuss the theoretical part, then we go hands-on. No worry. Now, what actually this AOP does for us, it provides the pluggable way to dynamically adding the additional concern before, after, around, so on, as we told, right? All these things. With the help of this, we can achieve that. Now, let's start with this core concepts. What core concepts are there and AOP types? First, start with the aspect. What is this aspect? It is actually a class that implements enterprise application concerns that cut across multiple classes. As told you, like transaction management, logging, and data validations. If you think aspect is nothing but it's not something like that we are going to what that there is nothing in that. Aspect is nothing but something, it is our normal class only. When do you say that it is an aspect? Spring framework provide this AOP annotation. There is annotation aspect that you have to apply to your class. Then your class will be called as aspect, and it is a aspect class. It is a normal class configured through either XML based configuration or you can base annotation configuration. To define a class is aspect class with simple annotation as @aspect. Then your class will be treated as aspect. Then you have to go with the advice, point cut, join point, and other annotations like before, after, around, after returning, after throwing. Okay. Now here the important term in aspect AOP is the advice. Everything is works on the advice only. As you may heard about that in the interview question also. What is an advice? But somebody think there is an annotation with the advice? No. Advice is nothing but it is the action taken by an aspect at a particular join point. In terms, you can say advices are the actions taken for a particular join point. If you think in terms of programming, they are the methods, right? They are, if you think you have a normal method to get, right, get employee, update employee, right, create employee, like that, it is a normal method. They are the methods that get executed when a certain join point with matching point cut is reached in the application. Then what do you think then? What is a join point? Join point is again, it works on the method, which means it is a point of execution of the program, such as executing a method or handling an exception. In Spring AOP, a join point always represents a method execution. A join point is a specific point in the application, which means such as the method execution, like exception handling or changing object variable values, etc. Simple terms you can say in generic, in simple, this join point is always the execution of a method, which means it is associated with the method. When the method execution, this join point is coming to picture. And this just there is a point cut which is associated that when this how this join point works with the help of point cut. And this point cut is a predicate, or you can say it is an expression that matches the join points. Again, this join point simply is an expression that matches with the join points to determine whether the advice needs to be executed or not. Means based on the point code, the join point decide whether it is executed or not, execution is required or not. It uses different kinds of expressions that are matched with the join point. And Spring framework uses this aspect point cut expression language, which means that everywhere we have some expression language, how this point cut gets executed and how this join point is executed. How this expression looks, that I will show you, no worry about that. And the advice is associated with the point cut expressions and run at any point join point matched by the point cut. Spring uses this aspect point cut expression as a default language. Okay. Now, as we are clear this, what is a aspect class? Aspect class is nothing but a normal class that annotated means if you use the annotation aspect, then that class is marked as we can say that class is a aspect class. And as a what is a point cut? Point cut simply say declares the point cut expression. Means to express that that method has to be executed on based on join point. Now let's go to one by one these annotations, then you will be more clear on that. What is this before? It declares the before advice. Before advice, what is this before advice? I am talking about before advice means that is not actually a separate annotation before advice. There is a just annotation before declares the before advice. It is applicable before calling the actual method, which means we have a method in our class get employee details, create employee record. So that is a method, which means it is applied on that actual method. These advices run before the execution of the join point methods. So then we use join point, before annotation to mark as advice step as before advice. Which means that what happens when you are calling a particular method XYZ, this before annotation gets invoked before your actual method execution gets started. Then if you are calling get all employees, which means this guy before advice gets invoked first to see what it has to do, what piece of code, what has to be, what is written in that, what it has to do before the actual method, our get all employees get called. Then if something is returned to log read and perform data validation to send any something notification or something, this guy gets invoked first. Which means like in our, we have a JUnit test cases. What is this before is doing? It is called that method, that test case get called before our actual test case get called. It is exactly same as that only. The before gets called, the before advice is gets called, it means which it runs that before our actual method gets invoked. And after it is reverse to the before. It is same as our JUnit after, which means it applied after calling the actual method. And but make sure after calling the actual method before it returning the result, which means then advice, this after advice gets executed after the join point method finishes executing, whether normally or it can be any exception or throwing an exception. We can create after advice using annotation just at the rate after. And after returning, this annotations declares the, which means the moment you use this after returning annotation, it performs the operation like after advice. Sometimes if you want to advice method to execute only if the join point method executed normally, then we use after returning annotation to mark a method as after returning advice. It is applied when it is applied. It is applied after calling the actual method and before returning the result, which means our endpoints, our methods get return the result, right? Which means this gets called before returning the result only. After returning the result, it doesn't do anything. Which means you can get the result value in the advice. Which means before it gets called means then obviously you will get the result. Next is around. What is this around does? It is applied before and after, which means it is a like combination of before and after advice. This is the most and powerful advice, means it's the most powerful annotation that use, right? It surrounds the join point method and we can also choose whether to execute the join point method or not. Okay, Now, next thing is after throwing. When do we use this after throwing? In case if we want to throw exceptions, that happens during our method execution. This gets executed only when the join point method throws the exception. We can use it for roll back the transaction declaratively. As we know that you have used the Spring annotation subtrade transactions, right? Right? The transaction gets executed in a particular context. Here, using this after throwing, if any exception happen, then this guy returns that exception by rolling back that. Now, no worry, these points, as what I said above, may sounds confusing, but when we look at the implementation of AOP, things will be more clear. Okay, let's start creating a simple application with AOP implementation. Okay, now as told, Spring provide aspect oriented programming. Then let's start with one by one. Now, what is this aspect? I told you, right? If any class that marks as written as aspect, then we can say is a aspect oriented. Then you have to start from this. When this get executed, this during, right? It has to be as a Spring component. That is the reason I have declared as component. Then Spring identify there is one object, one bean has to be created. Then bean will behave as a aspect class. Then the moment you say this aspect, then your class behaves as a aspect class. Now this is the first step. Then what is the next step? Then I say that advice. I keep saying as advice, advice. So what is that advice? See this, there is no annotation as advice. I told, right, advice is not an annotation. This is just the action to be taken. What is that? Advice is nothing but an action. Sorry. Now, what is a join point? Okay. Sorry. Now, I told that this aspect we discussed, then advice is the action taken by an aspect at a particular join point. There is no annotations. Annotation gets start. When this gets start, here, sorry, it's get done. Okay. So now, okay. Now, first we start with before, after annotation, then this will be covered as a part of that. Now, what is this first before? Okay, we'll start with the annotation before at the rate before. You see this? There is a before annotation. We don't see before advice. Then you say this is a before advice. It means it works as a before advice. Then there is no annotation like before advice. This before advice, it declares the before annotation declares the before advice. And I told you it is applied before calling the actual method. What actual method? Actual method would you say? Okay, let's go back to our class where I have written few methods as customer business service. Now I have a customer business service where I have all the methods that are there to get all the customers, customer by ID, to create a customer, update a customer, and delete customer. Now we perform all this. Now we work on these methods. Now here I have a log written in normally in general without AOP, Spring AOP. What we do that? Okay, this one use case you take that. If you want to trace your program, you have to have a logger at the beginning, at the end of the method, every day at the beginning and end of the method. Like you have to keep writing this logger right redundantly. So to do this, right, redundant work, this AOP will help us to write this loggers automatically at the beginning place and the end of this method. Right now, we'll discuss step by step. Now, first before. I told right before it is applied before calling the actual method and gets run before the execution of join point methods. Now let's start with the before. Sorry. So before annotation, what to do here? We have to have a code. The main declared annotation. That's that. This is syntax error, which means you have to provide the body to complete this advice. So let's take, I already have this one. Okay, instead of writing, it takes time. Okay, dump out, copy paste it here. Now I'm done with this. Now, if you see this, this is the expression that is used for the join point. And this using this expression, our method gets executed. What you are going to do this before, what is the syntax in this package, right? I mean, I say package service dot star customer business service dot star, in the sense applicable to all the methods in this class. What applicable means, before all the methods in this class gets called, I want to log this as currently calling method. Means I will say this currently calling method as a first logger in this class methods, which means for it is applicable to all the methods inside this customer business service. The moment you run the application, if this aspect class will call first, and look at that, what is the expression, that this is called as a expression, that based on this expression, this before advice get called and works accordingly. So what's our expectation here? Before advice, what it is doing this in this business service dot star, for all the methods you apply this loggers. Okay, now see this in the business service, in this I have already logger get all customers, and now I comment this one. I don't want to display this and show you that how it is printing the loggers. Now I don't have any loggers in my application because I have not written yet. I have not written yet. I don't want to return this explicitly. My AOP, using AOP, I want to log all the logs for all the methods in a particular class. You can have more than one package also like this, right? You can provide additional packages also. You can, if you in real-time scenario, it is not only one package, you can have additional package also wherever you want to have this functionality to add the loggers. Now let's come to this before advice. This method gets executed before your actual method calls. When I say dot star, then it keep calling that first get all customers, get customer by ID, add customer, and so on, so on. That whichever the method call you, then first this before advice gets called and print this logger information to you. Okay, let's see how this works. Now I have a main method which I'm calling all this method get all customers, add a customer, update a customer, and get customer IDP. Now let's see then do with the debug. I will show you, then you will have a clear idea on that what's happening in this. Now I am running this get all customers. Okay, now if I go inside, who gets called first? Okay, see this guy get called first. You have this one get all customers, even they have a breakpoint, right? I put the breakpoint here to every method here, okay, and here and here. Okay, this is not there. Okay, no worry, I will remove this later. Now this guy has come first and executing this one, and after that what do you do? Okay, sorry, this something went wrong. Let me start again. Okay, now when I say get all customers, see the control is going to aspect class first to print that. As told you, this before advice gets executed before your actual method gets called. My method is get all customers. Once it is done, then this will go back to that method. You could see this one, what it is doing this. Okay, just comment this. It takes time for this. Sorry for the interruption. Okay, Now see if I then see it comes here and executed this one. Okay, could see this join point. What it is doing? This join point is returning all these class notations based on the expression you return. Means execution is happening on this class. So what is this returning? First it is returning get all customers. What is this join point? Join point is doing actually acting on the class that you have defined it in the expression. So then after that, this guy go to the actual method. See now get all customers get called. Similarly, this is applicable for all. This time it is returning different method. See add customer. Then after that it gets called add customer. It is same for all the methods. Then after at the end, then what you could see this, you could see this one. See this, I know where I have not returned the loggers. Now this is automatically return the loggers for executed method. Method this then get all customers currently calling method, and this is the logger. You see this one, right? Executed method is this one, currently calling method that one. See this one here, you can see. Okay, now this is executed first. First this aspect class gets loaded based on the annotations that we defined. Before advice means before my actual class method gets, I want to add a logger. Okay, now you can remove this one. Okay, it will be more clear for you. Then you could see the clear logs. Now I will just run this. Now it is automatically running and call all those methods. Now you could see this one, currently calling method get all customers, add customer, update customer. Have you seen this? Any loggers here? No, I don't have any loggers. But however, there is a logger in say delete method, but I am not calling that delete method. That's why you could not see the logs pertaining to that method. Which means see this before advice gets executing, and this help us to add a log for all the methods inside this particular class, which means you no need to write the loggers explicitly for all the methods at the beginning, like it is a start execution of this method. Hope everyone is clear about this. Now we'll go to the next annotation. What is that? After sometimes there is a scenario, if it is expected we have to add a logger at the end of the method execution to see that the method is successfully completed and return from that method. So this after advice, which you can also says finally advice. How this finally advice? If you just go here, this call it as a finally advice also. This one after advice, or we call it as a after finally advice. When this gets called, it is applied after calling the actual method and before returning the result, which means when your method gets called and before it complete the execution, means before after complete the execution, but before if there is any return type, if return something, some data, then this gets come out before it return the actual results. Okay, let's see how this works. Now I will take the same thing, same expression, I will add it here. There is nothing difference. You could see the difference is only after and before. Now this is current method calling. Okay, now instead of current method calling, just I will remove this as calling method. Okay, method, some method, let's start it. Sorry. Okay, now it is how it looks. The logs are getting added to each and every method of this class as start logger, end logger. Now you just run this program and see this what happens. A logger will be added to each and every method of our customer business service. Here, see this one, method calling get all customers starts in, add customer starts in, update customer starts in, get customer body starts ends. Know where the loggers are written starting and ending. this aspect after advice is doing it for us. And told right, it return the results also, right? Before it returning the result, this gets, you see this one method, there is a method which is returning that customer by ID. Now, okay, I have a breakpoint there. Okay, let me run in the debug mode and show you how this works. Okay, this customer, this ignore this unnecessary. Okay, whenever the breakpoint comes there, we'll see this. Okay, this guy will keep the breakpoint there. Okay, add customer. Okay, what is this method? Add customer. Okay, now update customer. Okay, this update customer also not returning. Okay, get customer IDs returning HOD. Okay, wait for it. Turn to get that breakpoint update customer. Now we have a call to get customer by ID and see that it is returning customer. Now see this join part gets this. Now here see guest customer by ID. See, this is how this before and after advice gets called. Now sometimes there is a requirement to capture, to calculate the execution time of each endpoint in real-time scenario. If you are using a REST endpoint, right, in Spring or REST API, you want to check the execution time, means when the request submit till the response come back, what is the amount of time it takes to complete that request. Who do that? Who will respond? There is annotation called advice. So let's go back to this. There is a around annotation. As told you, right, around annotation is the combination of before and after, which means it calls before and after calling the actual method. And it is surrounds the join point method and which means this before it is joining the proceed point, which means this before annotation. When this executed internally, what happens? This guy gets called, which means internally it has that implementation. This around means around of these two annotations. If you look at this annotation, what it is to around advice, it wraps when it surround both executions like before and after, and then it finally get the target class name and the which method, the name of the method, get signature is nothing but the name of the method, right? Signature and the name, and it returns you the execution time between start and end point. Now let's see how this works here. Directly run this and see the response, what it is doing for us. Now you see this. See, for every method it is saying it is starts and end. After starting and ending, then it is displaying this. It takes this time. And similarly for this add customer, it took this time. And for update customer, 0 second. And for get customer by ID, this is the time it takes to execute a particular method. So like that, using around, we can perform these types of activity to calculate the execution time. So everyone is clear about before, after, and around annotation. Now the next annotation is, you will take that around after throwing exception. As I told you, right, in real-time scenario, we'll have a exception that get come in our programming logic. So to handle that exception, we will have this around, after throwing. If any exception happen during our code execution, then this guy handle the exception and display that. To which all methods you want to throw the exception. If you want to have particular method, then you can have the particular class method. This server the class name dot method name. Or if you want to handle exceptions for all method, you can go with this. It's not only for the particular class. If you have n number of classes in this com dot is for dot tech dot service, if you have customer service, business service, employee service, so on and so on, right? Wherever the class, irrespective of the classes, the folders, right, subfolders, then it look at that and it will handle all the exceptions and return back. Now in our case, we don't have any exceptions. Okay, now there is one more method which have the exception proven. That's I have the method which performing arithmetic calculation, like arithmetic operation. Okay, so, okay, copy this and put it down inside this method. Now what this guy is doing, this guy is doing arithmetic operation, and there is a issue with this logic. Now I'm calling this arithmetic operation, then there is issue, then it has to handle that. Say customer service dot arithmetic operation. What you have to pass, what it is doing inside that, something divisible by 0, a divisible by 0. Then I will pass this 5 and 0. Now this time what you could see that when it run the application, if I have error, then this gets displayed and thrown to the end user. Now you see this, what is happening, what is the exception is saying, right? It is calling method arithmetic ends, but what's happening at the end of this method, it is returning the error response. At first it is called, at the end before it return the result, I told you, right, before this combination of before and after execution, after and advice gets executed before the return result, before it return the actual response, there is an issue in that logic, then it return the response is not returned. What response is it's not returning? Why? There is an exception. Have you seen this? Any exception mechanism here? Any using try catch throwing? Nothing is there. This identifies that, say, give a clear stack trace in which method arithmetic operations the line number and what is the error, say arithmetic operation which is divisible by 0 is not the right thing. So that is the exception. Throws yes. So this is how before, after, around, and after throwing will work that. Now at last one more and this there. What is that? To capture method arguments. How do we capture the method arguments? Now for example, now after the method execution, now if there is a use case like after executing each method in real-time scenario, we may have a requirement when we execute some block of code, or if you create a record or create any new employee or you create any new data, it is expected to send a notification to that guide with the details provided for the login. Let's assume the login details. Not what to do, you have to, once the method gets executed, you have to capture, you have to get that object, and with that object you have to call the notification service to send out that notification data, right? Capture method argument means once it returns successfully, then only it is expected to send the notification, right? This same example, same scenario is applicable using aspect oriented program is the one which helps to achieve this also. In this customers, not only in this customer service, we have n number of services are there, right? And not, okay, let's take in this customer service only all these notifications are there. But after executing a certain, after creating a certain data, a type of data, I have to send out the notification to the users to the outside system. Wherever you expected to send out the notification, you have to go that method, this method, this method, everywhere you have to search and write the code. But the problem is in future, if your client don't want to send out the notification for a particular use case, if it is this type of employee, this type of record or this type of data, you stop sending the notification. What do you do? Then you have to go there and listen and search across wherever it is implemented. Then you have to go and remove that code. And if there is a need to change that notification, right, that become very complicated. Using this AOP, using after before advice, you can just ignore the particular method, right, to send a notification to a particular use case. So that is one of the scenario. Okay, now come back to the actual use case. Now this before, using this before advice only, there is same thing, there's nothing less. Okay, if you want to get this data and for before or after, you can apply to anything. If you want to send the notification before this guy gets executed, this method get executed, gets customer by ID, or you can say create a customer also. Once you create a customer, then before or after, whenever it based on your requirement, or after creating a customer data, you want to send XYZ is the login ID, password is XXXXX something. Then you want to send out that data as a notification email. Then you just say to which method and which service then you want to send the notification. You just say the name of the class and the method to which and what is that. Once the method gets executed, then the output will be returned to you, which means there is ID created successfully for this person. That is the login ID. So to get that argument, to get that value, we have to use as a capture method argument. How you do that? Using join point. Just the target is the class name and this name of that, and it's a class name and the method name. What is the argument? Arguments of 0. If you are sending returning multiple arguments, if you are sending multiple arguments, then you can return args of 0, 1, 2, 3 like that. Then you can get the argument. Now let's execute this one in the debug mode and see what's happening. Now comment this one, this raising an exception here. Okay, it's going on. Wait, be patient. Okay, this guy has come here. Okay, ignore all these things. Ignore this. Ignore this. Get customer by ID is our use case. Okay, now you see here this join point before get customer by ID, before I call method, I want to send a notification about that there is something going to create, some data is going to persist or something. Then it called the actual method. Then what is returning? This guy returns that method. You see this one? What is returning this? Executing customer business service get customer by ID with argument 1053. Now assume go back here and change this instead of before to, I can say at the rate after. Okay, now you could see this time what will happen. Okay, let's stop this current session. Okay, now this guy gets called before after is there. Now this method, now you see this one, this execution get customer by ID, and this guy is returning that data for you. Argument name is that 1053. So you can apply this before or after advice. If it is requirement is that such a way that after creating the customer data or after creating a, or submitting a data, then you see there is successfully record creation happens, that the record is created successfully. So this is the output and this is the ID that is auto generated, and this you can use for further activities. So like that. So this is how our AOP will help us to all this stuff. Means this Spring AOP aspect oriented programming that you can achieve using all this type of stuff. What you could see, what we have covered is using all these annotations only. All these are all the concept that we are applying to our aspect oriented programming, right? The aspect is nothing but this is aspect. Now if you comment this one, what happens? See, then your class will not work anymore as a aspect oriented program. When I run this one and see what happens, there is nothing happens to that, because it will not, the Spring framework identify it is a Spring component, Spring object in the IOC content, but it will not behave that aspect, right? Aspect things will not work. You commented this one, how this before advice, after advice, nothing join point or any point cut, nothing will work. Why? we have stopped giving support. We have stopped support of this aspect. We just say declare this class as aspect. Then this AOP will treat this guy is the taking support using aspect oriented program. Then it will look go and inside. Otherwise, it is like closing the gate to the person and entering inside a house. Then once you open the gate, then you go there according to his instruction, right? Wherever he wants to go for do his work, then he go to the right house and do the stuff. Same way Spring AOP also. Once it identifies there is a aspect class, then it go inside and look at the advisors before, after, or whatever it may be. Then it performs operations on that what we have mentioned in that. So always remember there is no confuse that just join point. It is a point of execution of the method. It's like as executing our normal method only. Point cut is the just a predicate or expression that matches the join point. To determine whether advice needs to be executed or not. So this both join point and point cut are correlated. But you can say point cut, there is no point cut keyword we have used it here. They say using join point only, using the kind of simple join point preceding join point. See this, what is the use of preceding join point? It exposes the precede method in order to support around advice in aspect. When it around advice, and around advice contains again before and after implementations. Okay, this all about AOP concept in Spring. Okay, just please do a hands-on to get better understanding on that. Right? And one more thing I would want to say, while writing this expression, point cut expression, please be careful with the spaces. If I just say remove space, what would happen then? See now this gets failed because there is a syntax error will happen. Even a small space leads to a bigger issue. Could see there is an exception. What it is saying, clearly saying that unable to start the server. The reason is that there is execution, right? The point cut expression, point cut is not well formed, which means you have not formed, you have not built it properly. Name pattern at character position 60. There is a pattern. You see, it is clearly showing that one, to which it is a customer service that one, which annotation is that, it is a before annotation. Then you can go here and fix that issue. So be careful for such things. Okay, avoid these issues. Okay, now there is no space in between that. Okay, give space here or no space here, it doesn't matter. But in the expression, we have to follow this syntax, standard syntax. We have to give star space and that. Right? Where is this package inside this execution? Right? So this is all about this Spring AOP. We'll catch you in the next session. Okay, see you. Bye.